Is income inequality related to human mortality or morbidity? This is a question about associations. My second question is, do reductions in income inequality improve health outcomes? This question requires causal inference. Economic inequality seems to be increasing. I've seen many graphs like the one on the left that show that the top 1% or 5% of the population have increased earnings or wealth, while others have rather stagnant earnings or wealth. And on the right, there is some evidence that as the rich get richer, more people get sicker. That is, as measures of well-being go down as income inequality increases. So there's a hypothesis that greater inequality within societies produces worse health outcomes for everyone because poor people receive less than optimal nutrition and health care, and wealthier people experience more stress, possibly because of pressure to preserve their rank in society and perhaps awareness that their position is due, at least in part, to luck or birth. So I did a search in ProQuest limited to articles that appeared after 2000, and here's my first search string. I got 8 hits, including 1 meta-analysis that I focused on in the first part of the assignment. Very efficient search, thanks to Alex. The second search string, also shown here, focusing now on causes, effects, or impacts. This one yielded 20 hits, including a so-called systematic review that was not very systematic, a couple of other poor quality reviews, and 1 randomized controlled trial that I critically appraised. So my appraisal of the meta-analysis showed that it included 9 cohort studies and 19 cross-sectional studies on income inequality and mortality or health outcomes. These studies were conducted in many countries over several decades with 60 million participants. The meta-analysis met 6 of the 11 Amstar criteria, so it is less than ideal. Its results provide evidence for associations between greater inequality, lower life expectancy, and worse health outcomes, but these results are inconsistent across studies, and the authors make a few unsubstantiated causal inferences. The cluster randomized controlled trial, in which 40 villages in the Bolivian Amazon were randomly assigned to 3 conditions, was an interesting study. These conditions were, number 1, income assistance for everyone, so no change in inequality. Number 2, income assistance, that is more than 1 month's wages, for the poorest 20% of households in each village, and minimal aid to others. So this condition was reduced inequality. And third, the control group received minimal aid across the board. So this study was well conducted, controlling for 6, possibly 7 of the 8 threats to internal validity. But I think it has little external validity. The participants were forager farmers in a tight-knit, relatively egalitarian set of villages. The short-term results suggested that both the increased income and reduced inequality conditions, that's groups 1 and 2, increased stress for the wealthiest 80% of the households in those villages compared to the control group. Reduced inequality, condition 2, had negative effects on health incomes for the poorest 20%, possibly because of changes in their diet. There's really a need for more follow-up to determine the long-term impacts of health in this study. So my conclusions are that greater income inequality within geopolitical regions is correlated with lower life expectancy and poorer health outcomes. This shows up in many studies, but meta-analysis shows that these results are somewhat inconsistent across studies. These associations between inequality and health can vary by the age, gender, and region of the sample. There are a few controlled studies of attempts to reduce inequality. The cluster randomized controlled trial in Bolivia shows that such studies are possible and potentially useful, but Bolivian Amazon villages are relatively egalitarian to begin with, so they're not the best location for this kind of study, and results aren't generalizable to other settings. Implications for social work practice to me suggest that we need to continue emphasis on support for vulnerable populations. And for policy, I think we need to consider strategies to reduce inequality, address the social determinants of health, and improve health outcomes across the board. For research, I think we need more rigorous systematic reviews to explore reasons for variations across studies of inequality and health outcomes. And we need more primary studies to explore the potential impacts of strategies to reduce inequality and improve health. Thanks for listening.